Yeah, I think this is totally gonna work. No problem. Normal wash. There we go. It's perfect. Well, hi everyone, welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. So don't worry, I didn't actually put the Apple IIc in the dishwasher like that. I'm not crazy. It might have survived, although the disk drive, which has motors and bearings and things, that's probably not such a great idea to get that full of water. But the rest of the computer probably would have been totally fine. But I'm not actually going to do that, although this video does involve the dishwasher. So if you guys can believe it, I actually ended up with another Apple IIc. This one doesn't have a fault though, so there's nothing to fix, but there is a problem on this machine I want to address today. This Apple IIc has the non-Alps keyboard. This seems to be the most common keyboard there is out there, and you can kind of tell the difference right off the bat without even pulling a key by looking at the caps lock key. The non-Alps keyboard caps lock key wiggles a lot from side to side, just like this one is doing. On this particular keyboard as well, the shift key and the control keys seem to be unstabilized. So you see if I push in the middle, works fine, but pushing on the side doesn't actually go down. If I probably push hard enough it will, but it feels like it's gonna break the key. The biggest issue with this computer though involves the keyboard, and not that it's the less good keyboard that doesn't feel as nice to type on. This particular one just feels horrible, like much worse than this should. Any of the keys, like this G key, if I push it over on the side here, on the edges, it binds up and you have to push really hard to get it to go down. They feel scratchy and just generally horrible. And you know, when you type on a normal keyboard, you don't always hit the keys perfectly in the center. And because of that, if the keyboard is dirty, like there's dirt inside the switches, then that binding action makes it really unpleasant to type on. And this keyboard is a perfect example of that. The rest of this machine is just really yellow and unpleasant to look at. So that's something I can address in the future when I have more sunlight available to me. It might be hard to see on camera, but this definitely has some engraving here. It's some high school and from Eugene, Oregon, which is a city just south of Portland. Anyhow, the reason I'm in the kitchen for this video is I'm going to be putting this keyboard in the dishwasher. Linus Tech Tips had recently done a video where they poured food all over keyboards and put them in the dishwasher and didn't seem to have any ill effects. Of course, the first thing I need to do is disassemble this case and remove the keyboard, so let's get right to that. So I'm intrigued by the insides of this IIc. The solder mask is a different color. It's kind of the yellow color compared to that other one I just fixed. This additional MMU chip is in a socket where on my other one it wasn't. The RAM is Fujitsu brand RAM, so not that horrible MT RAM, which is probably why this machine works properly. And even more fascinating is this section of the motherboard was unpopulated on the other IIc, but on this one it is. So anyone know what this little section does? Something else I'm going to mention is that this case cover was a lot easier to take off for some reason. And I don't think it's because I knew how to do it this time around. It just levered right off and was pretty simple. But here is the reason for taking this apart, and it's this keyboard. One observation, wow, this thing is way lighter than the Alps one. And flipping it over, this is that structural plastic piece I was talking about that is different from the Alps one. The Alps one doesn't have this, because on the top of the PCB on the Alps has a metal base plate, which gives it much more strength and rigidity. And without this strengthening piece on the back, when you typed on the middle keys, this whole keyboard would bend and flex in a really crappy way. Also, this is the section that slots into the disk drive, and on the Alps, it was actually a nice metal piece, and on this keyboard, it's just part of the PCB. In addition, this is the slot on the disk drive where the keyboard goes in, and on the Alps one, there was actually kind of a metal spring right here that I think when you stuck the keyboard in, it would ground the base plate to the floppy drive. And this thing doesn't have the spring, and on the keyboard there is no metal there, so there is no ground contact being made when you slot this in. Alright, the next step is I'm going to use my keycap puller right here to pull all these keycaps off and throw them in this little bucket, which I will fill with soapy water in a bit to wash these keys. So there we have it. All the keys are removed. A couple observations. None of the larger keys, like the shift keys, are stabilized at all. Stabilized means that there's a little bar here helping out when you push down on the edge. So the space bar has it. So if you push over on the side of the space bar, even though the key switch is in the middle, it still pushes down. Better keyboards are stabilized on any of the large keys, and the Alps keyboard is definitely stabilized on the shift keys, the enter key, the control key, any of the larger ones. So pretty crap that this one didn't do that. Also, there's a rubber membrane that sort of lays over all the key switches. In fact, it's a rubber membrane, and then there's this sort of foam pad. So obviously I'm going to lift that off so that any kind of washing actually goes inside of these switches. Also interesting with the design is there's a little metal spring on each of the switch there. You see that? And I think it has something to do with the way the tactile switch works. Not positive, and I suppose there's a little bit of a concern that these might come off in the wash, but they seem to be relatively well installed there, so I'm not too concerned. Also, the caps lock key is a latching type, and this one doesn't actually work properly. It feels really gummed up. These two at the top are also latching, and they also feel pretty cruddy. It's actually a brand name printed here on the PCB, Photo Circuits Atlanta. Guess they're the manufacturer of this junky keyboard. Also, what's the deal with this? The sticker that says Touch Up. Touch Up 1. Anyway, I think it's time for washing. This is going to be going in the dishwasher. At least in the US, dishwashers have a heating element on the bottom, so it does get much hotter there. It's what keeps the water extra hot while it's washing. So I'll be putting the keyboard up here on the top shelf, and my dishwasher has a water sprayer there. So if I lay the keyboard on top like this, it will be getting a ton of water sprayed over it during the entire wash cycle. I think I might put it this way, actually. I want to try to get as much water into those key switches as possible to flush out as much of that dust and dirt that's in there. On the top roof, there's also another sprayer that sprays water down. So there seems to be little pegs that poke through the PCB, and water should hopefully get in there to help flush things out as well. Okay, I'm just going to close this up, and I'm going to be using soap. I have some of this Cascade Complete. I find this works really well on dishes at preventing any kind of water spots or etching on things. So I figure one of these might help out for the keyboard as well. Something else about the water in Portland is our water is very soft here. It doesn't have a lot of mineral content in it. And the mineral content is what leads to a lot of water spots on your car or on dishes, for instance. We do have some options on this particular washing machine for the different wash cycles. I think I'm just going to do light wash. Push that. And there are some options here for heating. So Santa rinse means super hot water, which I'm not going to use. High temperature scour, I'm not going to use that. And air dry, which means it doesn't use the heating element at the end. That is turned on. I always run that to save energy anyways. And now the washer is going to fill up and it's going to wash the keyboard. What's going to happen? It's a washing. All right, it's done. Let's take a look. Ooh, yes. Lots of water inside. So I'm over the sink here. I'm going to shake out as much water as I can. A lot of it came out when I shook it over the dishwasher. So quick test. Is the latching key any better? No, it's not. That one's still getting stuck, and this one doesn't latch at all. So that really might not have done anything. Okay, let's take this downstairs. All right, I'm over the utility sink, and I'm going to spray a whole bunch of 99% IPA into all of this. My idea is that it will just help flush away any of the water that is inside the key switches. And of course, the 99% IPA will evaporate a lot more easily into the connector. Okay. Let me just do the old shakeout. All right, what I have up here in the rafters is a binder clip. So I can clip that on right there like that and let this thing drip dry over the utility sink. I also set up a small fan which is blowing air right onto the keyboard just to help circulate air around it. All right, so the keyboard's had plenty of time to dry, and now it's time to check it out. One thing I notice, one of the springs is slightly dislodged, so I suppose that was a close call. Might have been worse than if it had gone flinging inside my dishwasher down into the part that chops up the food. So the keyboard looks really clean now. Now, is the action of the key switches any better than it was? I think this was the G key here, and it feels pretty crappy. I'd say that they feel a little less scratchy than they used to feel. So that's probably comes down to the loss of dirt. This key, for instance, the tactile bump, it's okay. It's kind of noisy, but this one, it really hangs up on the tactile bump. Down on the workbench, we can get a much closer look at how this works. So this spring is definitely part of the tactile switch. That gives this slider an actual tactile bump. And it looks like when you push it down, it catches up on the right side. See it moving? And it seems like the one on this side is for the upstroke. See how it really clicks there on the way up? So if I hold this over to the side, I push down on this, then sure enough, yeah, on the upstroke, there's no more bump. Also fascinating, check this out. Little Apple logos on every single one of these switches. So I think it's time to do a test. So this key is really not feeling so great. And I wonder what happens if I just put a tiny bit of Deoxit. And Deoxit has a little bit of lubricant action to it. So right off the bat, that makes the switch so much better feeling. It's hard to convey, but it no longer is feeling binding up. It just has a tactile bump and feels pretty good now. Compared to the neighboring switches here that I haven't done anything to, this one feels a million times better. I'd say that the keys don't feel any worse than they did before I washed it, but if there was a little bit of lubricant, it might have washed away any remnants of that. So this one here feels really horrible. Let's do the Deoxit on this. I mean, there's some in the tube still. I can just drip it on here. Pretty fantastic. It went from feeling just terrible to feeling pretty good. So some time has passed, and I put Deoxit in the escape key about 30 minutes ago, and still feeling pretty good. So Deoxit might be just the right amount of lubricant that these keys need to feel good. If not, I'm going to need to find some other lubricant to put in the switches. If you have any recommendations for a key switch lubricant that's not too gummy and sticky, and it won't interfere with the contacts, let me know. I'll be very curious about that. While I'm at it, let's try to attack these latching switches. It kind of works, and Deoxit can be a wonder for these as well. So we'll just drip that in. It's not really any better. Sometimes just going through the motions enough times will kind of fix it. And you know what? Look, it's working better already. Finally, we have caps lock, which is in a similar bad state. See, it's not really latching properly. Yeah, so caps lock is not coming good. There's typically a little metal hook and some plastic grooves on the key switch body here. It's possible that the plastic part that's on the slider that latches to a metal piece is broken. Well, this switch is just not working properly no matter what I do, so I'm going to switch it with this one, which seems to work the best of the three. So I'll have a working caps lock, and I don't particularly care that these two don't work. And while I wait for the desoldering iron to warm up, I'm going to spray Deoxit over this entire keyboard and work all the keys just to make sure they're a little less bindy than they are now. Crappy key switch removed. Okay, here's the working key switch, which will become the caps lock key. So the bad switch that doesn't latch is right there at the top. And down at the bottom here on the caps lock spot, it's the key that works pretty well. In here has been the keys soaking with a little bit of detergent and warm water for quite a while now. So I need to take out all these keys and give them a little bit of a wipe down and let them dry before I reinstall them on the keyboard.
While the keys dry, let's work on something to make powering the 2C a little easier.
Something I've wanted to do for a while is make a little DC adapter pigtail. So what you see here is the DIN connector, which is right here on the power supply for the 2C, which only has ground and 15 volts, even though it has all those pins. And then I wanted to add a little short length of wire with a DC standard barrel jack with center positive. That way I wouldn't need to look for the giant 2C brick every time I wanted to use it. I could just plug this in with a standard 12 volt power supply and it would actually work. Even though the power supply is 15 volts, the stock one, 12 volts works fine as well since it's a little switching power supply inside the 2C. The power connections are very simple, 2 pins of ground and 2 pins of 15 volts. I'm just going to solder the wires onto this standard little DIN connector. So I'm making a little picture for myself just so I don't screw it up. These two are 15 volts on that side and these two are ground. All right, there we go, soldered on. I trimmed off the excess pins on here just so there's no chance of them touching. All right, so I have the actual 2C power supply here, and I have mine that's connected to a power supply now. So let's just see how this looks on the multimeter. So this is a 2C power supply. We're getting 18.5 volts. That would mean this is an unregulated power supply. It's just a transformer with a bridge rectifier. So we're getting some DCs, probably a capacitor for some smoothing, and that's it. So probably goes to around 15 volts under load. But yeah, that just means that, you know, the power supply on the 2C is pretty accepting of a wide range of voltages. All right, and then the one that I just made, I don't need to poke things in the hole, so the notch is down. Now I'm getting 12.2 with this particular power supply, and I'm definitely on the same 2 pins as on the Apple IIc power supply. So I'm confident my little adapter is wired up the correct way. Now to assemble the DIN connector. There we go. This is a little bit of a cheap DIN connector, but it should do the trick. So there's my little adapter. Nice. So here's an Apple IIc. I have it plugged into the stock power supply. No keyboard currently. If I turn it on, we're going to get the diagnostic screen. Yep, there we go. That's operating absolutely normally for a ROM 255 machine. Okay, I'm going to unplug the stock power supply just to show you guys what I'm using. 2 amp, 12 volts right there, plugged into the adapter. Let's run this around to the back here. Plug that in, turn it on. There we have it. Functional off 12 volts. So there's no need to go find a fancy 15 volt power supply. So in case you were wondering, I measured the voltage rails out of this power supply while running on 12 volts, and everything was absolutely fine. There was no differences in any of the power rails. They were exactly the same. And in case you want to see the 2C running off the disk drive, here it is. Tetris 2. Sound is working, disk drive is working, and I'm running off the 12 volts perfectly. All right, the keys are dry. I have a picture of the keyboard to help me reassemble. The keyboard is ready to go. Let's start the process. So it's the next day, and let's stick this keyboard into the 2C. And you know what? The Deoxit is still working well. I still think that this particular keyboard is pretty terrible feeling, probably even when it was brand new. The rubber and foam mat that's under the key kind of dampens the key pushes. It makes them feel rubbery, especially when it's bottoming out, and it probably would feel a lot better if I just took this off entirely. I have a feeling that Apple added this as a spill prevention for the keyboard, because if you spilled some water just on the keyboard, probably mostly will drain out along the bottom edge of the computer, which is just a vent right here. There's no PCB there, just the speaker in the middle. But it has a terrible side effect of just making everything feel really mushy. I don't really know how much use this computer actually got, but one thing I've noticed is even after cleaning and lubrication, the keys feel a little uneven. Like the G key has a little bit of a tactile bump and a click, but the F key lacks the tactile click and bump almost entirely. The U key is another example that's a little weird. The Y key and the I key both have a tactile click and bump, but the U key doesn't. There is one thing that is definitely possible, and if you want to turn this keyboard into a linear keyboard, you just pull out all of those little springs and you will no longer have the click or the tactile feel, and you'll just have nice linear keys. Also, removing this rubber mat will probably make the keys feel a lot more positive and less rubbery on the bottom. Now I need to ask myself a question, and was it worth putting this keyboard into the dishwasher? And I will have to answer that with a no. I don't think the dishwasher made this keyboard worse in any way. In fact, I think it really did remove some of the scratchiness. The biggest effect on this keyboard was actually the Deoxit. All the keys were working, but it removed all the binding that was going on and the unevenness in the tactility. And I mean unevenness where some keys were really quite hard to push down, and if you didn't push them quite on the middle, it really bound up. The Deoxit is what got rid of that, and not the dishwasher. So can you put this 2C keyboard in the dishwasher? Well, yes, you can. Should you? I'm going to say skip it unless there's visibly a lot of dirt inside the switches. So with the keyboard complete, there's one more thing I want to do to this computer before I close it up, and it involves the ROM.
On my last Apple IIc repair video, I upgraded the ROM from the stock 255 original ROM to Apple's enhanced 32K ROM 0. Several viewers commented that there was actually a ROM on GitHub that brings enhanced functionality to the Apple IIc. While I was doing research on the ROM upgrade for that last 2C, I came upon this GitHub page, but what wasn't clear to me is whether this ROM 4X worked on that original Apple IIc that I had. The reason why is this 4X ROM is specifically an enhancement to Apple's version 4 ROM. And the version 4 ROM was found on the later Apple IIcs that had a RAM expansion port on the motherboard. The entire motherboard was redesigned to support a RAM expansion card that allowed up to 1 megabyte of RAM inside the Apple IIc. So essentially for the non-2C Plus machines, there were two major motherboard versions. There's the version on the right, which is just like the one you saw in my video, which has 128K of RAM. And then there's the version on the left, which has the RAM expansion card. And notice it has far less RAM chips. It seemed that either Apple and or third parties offered RAM cards that use this expansion slot that were battery backed up, so you could turn them into RAM disks. But through a conversation on Twitter, I was informed that this ROM does in fact work on all the way back to the very first Apple IIc. One of the really cool features of this ROM is a boot menu which you can bring up to do various things like enter the monitor, but specifically you can boot the external floppy drive or even the smart port drive, which is typically a 3.5-inch drive called the unit drive, I think, which works on the Apple IIc. All right, let's put a 32K EPROM into the MiniPro. I've loaded the 4X ROM into the MiniPro software, and let's program this up. All right, let's do the ROM upgrade. So we just pop the keyboard out. I'm going to flip it over without unplugging it. Here's the original ROM chip. Pop that out. And if you recall from the last video, I have to cut this trace and add a solder blob over here. So if you're not sure on how to do this, go check out my last Apple IIc repair video, and it will explain in more detail how this ROM upgrade works. It's always good to verify with your multimeter if you've done that cut properly, and I have. No more continuity there. And right up here between the MMU and the IOU is this area you got to blob the solder on. And let's just verify. Yep, that's good. So doing this mod connects the address lines correctly so that the computer can properly address this entire 32K ROM chip. Little Deoxit in the socket. There we go, ROM inserted. And now it's the smoke test for the 4X ROM. Hey, it boots, that's a good sign. Nice, so it appears to be working, and this new ROM, when it sees no bootable disk, it drops into basic with this no bootable device message. If I push open Apple, close Apple control reset, we should get the RAM diagnostics that we had on the other ROM 1 machine. System okay, so that's saying the RAM is good on this machine. So this boot menu this has apparently is accessed by pushing closed Apple control reset. So let's check out these options. If I push 0, that just drops us right into the monitor. Very nice. Reboot. That just does a normal boot. Oh, look at this. It has a little thing on the bottom showing us the ROMX version. 0 RAM card. Well, I don't have a RAM card, so nothing to do there. 3, that just goes into the diagnostics we were just running. RAM card diagnostics. Let me just see what happens if I try it. Am I sure? Okay, it went into the monitors, probably because the RAM card doesn't exist. And then we have boot smart port, internal and external 5.25 inch. So the smart port is actually that 3.5-inch disk drive I talked about, but there are also external hard drives, apparently, up to 20 megabytes in size that can plug into that floppy drive connector. And I found some plans on the internet to use an Arduino to actually emulate a hard drive on the smart port, which would theoretically allow large volume sizes even on an Apple IIc. And now what I wanted to try is booting the external 5¼ inch using the load runner disk, which didn't work on that first ROM, and see if it's any different. 7. Nope. Exactly the same. The load runner game is very unhappy. So just like before, booting off the external floppy drive just ends up being slot 6 drive 2. So things that aren't compatible are still not going to be compatible. But I have to say, ROM 4X is pretty cool in that it brings back booting off the external drive, and it brings the enhanced diagnostics that you really need to make sure your RAM is good on this thing. So thumbs up to ROM 4X and the developers who came up with this. This is a worthwhile upgrade to anyone who likes to use their 2C. Just going to put a little ROM 4X label onto this EPROM. So because this board is populated here, I can't stick this ROM there like I did on the last one. So I put some double-sided adhesive, the stuff I use for heat sinks, onto this chip. So I'm going to invert it and stick it down right there onto the keyboard map ROM, and this will hold it firm. That stuff is quite sticky and it doesn't come off very easily. Well, and with that, it's really time to reassemble this machine. And that's going to be it for this video. Second look at an Apple IIc. I hope you found some of the stuff I did interesting. If you did, you know what to do. I'd appreciate a thumbs up. And if you didn't, you know what to do as well. You can hit the thumbs down button. Definitely subscribe for more videos. Hit that little bell icon if you want to be notified about future ones I post. And put your comments and your suggestions in the comment section below. I definitely read all the comments that everyone leaves. And thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.